So I heard you present at a conference, and I was so fascinated by the work that you were doing on microchips and employees.
Yeah, and I thought it was something that I sort of viewed as like a next generation sort of employee privacy issue, even beyond sort of the things we're currently dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And as I got into the research, at least for me, it was a little surprising that this is actually going on. Like people are voluntarily just outside of the employment, but just microchipping themselves,
They are?
having that done, and primarily it seems like it's taking place more in Europe and
Okay.
in Sweden.
Really? So you have to tell me the story of like people who are microchipping themselves.
I guess some people feel very comfortable with that. Putting the chip in usually it's put it in your sort of hand area, and it
Really?
quickly. And so people will use the chip for all sorts of, I guess, personal purpose. You can use it to pay for items.
Okay.
And just basically store different things on that chip. I mean, in some sense, it's no different than having information stored on a chip on a credit card, or
Sure.
information stored on an iPhone, for example.
I guess one version we could imagine in the future, which sounds like it aligns with maybe what's happening in Sweden, is people, for whatever reason, wanting to get these chips for personal convenience.
Right.
And once you actually have them, the employer is saying, well, actually, this is kind of helpful, either because we can surveil you with this thing you already have, or maybe we want to add information onto this chip.
And even in this country, there was an example a few years ago, and this was all, presumably done very voluntarily, but a tech company where a significant number of those employees they had sort of what they called a chip party, and many of them actually got the chip. They were sort of, I guess, it was all part of the employer, at least sort of organizing in a sense, and it was a tech company.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things in the paper, and we have this, of course, in other areas of the law, but trying to figure out what should be the legal constraints on, what really is voluntary, what is really consent.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think through in the future, at some point, if a technology gets very widespread use,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense, there becomes more and more pressure on, on individuals to acquiesce to what the majority seems to be in utilizing the
Right.
technology, right? And so,
I mean, you see it already with, phones. People already carry those around, and it's
right.
so easy for the employer to say, well, we want you to use your phone to like check into work, to log into work, right?
Exactly.
And then it turns out that app where you're logging into work can be used to just tracking your location.
There are steps that are being taken by certain state legislatures to actually regulate specifically on this point.
Really?
There are a handful of states.
What do they say?
Well, the jurisdictions that were doing the best job on this, their statute would have very detailed rules about what constitutes consent, sort of informed consent ideas within the statute, allowing for the removal of the chip whenever the employee would want. If an employee would want to allow access to personal information that's on their chip, mm-hmm. there would be no detriment or benefit gained by that. So that, that there wouldn't be some coercion to actually acquiesce to this, and there may be no incentive because there wouldn't be necessarily a benefit.
It reminds me a little bit of when Congress passed the GINA Act, the Genetic Information.
Yeah, with GINA, yeah.
Yeah, I remember at the time, I mean, that was quite a while ago. I remember at the time thinking that's like ridiculous. That's like futuristic stuff or whatever. Right. But now, I mean, it's much more.
Yeah, it's much more applicable.
That they could do something with your genetic information.
And relevant, yeah. Things tend to change fast.
Yeah.
So what you might think is something that is so far out in the future, mm-hmm. and may not always be so far out, right? I mean, because how long was it when we first started, when iPhones first came about? Do you remember what year it was?
I'm going to say 2008.
Yeah, so I mean, that's like 12 years ago, right? I mean, it's That's not so long ago.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, at least, right? Like,
I think one of the things you said is that it's the technology is already here. I mean, this is chipping, like this technology exists.
Yeah,
now.
it's already there. Well, I think it's already there. It's just also though, like realistically, how much can the technology be used?
Mm-hmm. But the only thing that's standing between us and our microchip future is like a way for these microchips to make our lives very convenient.
Well, that's what I see is that when things tend to be convenient, people just go to it, right?
Right.
Of that issue. And we're accustomed now to, like, people for medical reasons have pacemakers, mm-hmm. right? In some sense, it's like we understand that. Mm-hmm. As an accommodation issue, just in terms of being able to access facilities. Mm-hmm. With disability, having a chip mm-hmm. could help them so much in their employment. Just to be able to get through a door mm-hmm. and have the chip where they don't have to use a key or a fob. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And to have that sort of ability is very meaningful. And so if the technology is there and the employee could both access it, mm-hmm. accommodation law, disability law would say the employer needs to provide that reasonable accommodation, right? Unless there's
Absolutely.
some undue hardship. So there are beneficial aspects to this. Mm-hmm. It's just, unless you stop and think through all the different scenarios, it may be hard to piece together what the law should be for different circumstances.